Why is my hall empty? Where is everyone? I invited every single person I know.
That was Jasmine Ferris, 25 years old, standing in a room she had spent 5 months in every spare dollar building toward, and it was completely, utterly empty. Before I tell you what she did next, if you love stories about the quiet ones who keep showing up for everyone else and the reckoning that finally arrives when they stop, hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because what Jasmine did after that empty hall is not what anyone in her family expected, and it changed every one of their lives. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one. Now, let's go back to where this really started. Jasmine Ferris was 24 years old, the only child of Ruth and Desmond Ferris, and worked the register at a small neighborhood grocery store in a modest part of town where everybody knew everybody and nobody had much extra to spare. Her paycheck barely covered her rent and bus fare most months, and some months it didn't cover both, which meant a lot of quiet decisions about which bill waited another week. But if you asked anyone who knew Jasmine, they'd tell you the same thing without hesitation. She was the most reliable person any of them had ever met. When her friend Tanya threw a baby shower for her second child, Jasmine showed up 3 hours early with balloons she'd bought herself and didn't leave until the last dish was washed. When her cousin Renee got engaged, Jasmine organized the entire bridal shower on a budget so tight she skipped groceries that week to make it happen. When her friend Coco graduated from nursing school, Jasmine was the one who found the venue, printed the programs, and stood at the door greeting guests like she worked there. When Bex's mother passed away 2 winters earlier, Jasmine was the one who sat with her through 3 straight nights at the funeral home, bringing coffee and quietly handling the small logistical things nobody else thought to ask about. And when her aunties and uncles needed a little extra to cover a utility bill or a car repair, Jasmine handed over cash she genuinely couldn't afford to lose, because that was simply who she'd always been, the one who showed up, the one who gave, the one everybody could call. But there was one thing Jasmine had wanted her entire life that she had never once had: a birthday party. Growing up, her parents believed birthdays were an indulgence, an unnecessary expense in a household that watched every dollar, and so while her friends grew up with cakes and balloons and a room full of people singing their name, Jasmine grew up watching from the outside, told each year that maybe next year, a promise that never once came true. Her father, Desmond, had grown up the youngest of 6 children in a house where there was rarely enough to go around, and somewhere along the way, he decided that spending money celebrating a single day felt indulgent in a way his own childhood never allowed him to understand. Her mother, Ruth, had gone along with it more out of habit than conviction, the way people sometimes inherit a belief simply because nobody in the house ever challenged it out loud. By the time Jasmine turned 24, she'd stopped expecting it from her parents entirely, but she hadn't stopped wanting it. If anything, the wanting had only grown quieter and heavier with every year that passed it by, tucked away in the same part of her that also noticed, every single year, how easily she showed up for everyone else's celebrations while quietly sitting out her own. One evening, sitting on Tanya's back porch with Tanya, Renee, Bex, and Coco, all 4 of the women who'd known her since high school, Jasmine finally said the thing she'd been carrying inside her for years. "I want to throw myself a 25th birthday party. Real decorations. A real hall. Everyone I love in one room, finally, just once." The 4 of them lit up immediately, telling her she deserved it, that it was about time, until Bex, always the practical one, asked the obvious question. "Jasmine, sweetheart, how exactly are you going to pay for that on a grocery store paycheck?" The porch went quiet for a moment. Jasmine just smiled. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I know it's going to happen." That night, lying in bed, Jasmine pulled out a notebook and started writing. Not vague hopes this time, but an actual plan. First, no more showing up late for her shift. She'd be the one who opened the store every single morning, catching the early customers, earning every commission she could. Second, she'd find a second job, anything, evenings, weekends, whatever it took. Third, every extra dollar, no exceptions, went straight into an envelope marked birthday fund. She set her alarm for 5:30 and went to sleep with a plan for the first time in years, instead of just a wish. The next morning she was at the grocery store before the manager even unlocked the doors. She worked harder that day than she had in months, and by closing time her feet ached in a way they hadn't in a long while. But she wasn't finished. On her walk home 3 days earlier, she'd noticed a hand-lettered sign taped in the window of Everly Home Goods, a mid-sized furniture and decor store 2 blocks from her apartment. Help wanted, evenings and weekends. She walked straight there after her shift, still in her grocery store apron, and asked about the job before she'd even had time to talk herself out of it. She started that same week. If you'd spent your whole childhood being told a birthday party was a waste of money, and then finally decided, as an adult, to give yourself the one thing nobody ever gave you, how far would you go to make it happen? Let me know below. Because Jasmine was about to go further than any of her friends could have imagined, working 2 jobs 7 days a week for a dream most people around her didn't think she deserved yet. 5 months went by in exactly that rhythm. Mornings at the grocery store, evenings stocking shelves and helping customers at Everly Home Goods. Every spare dollar folded into an envelope she kept hidden in her closet. At the end of the first month, she sat down and counted what she'd saved, and her stomach dropped. Even working both jobs, even skipping almost everything else, the number wasn't close to what a real haul and a real celebration would cost. Only 4 months left until her birthday, and she was nowhere near where she needed to be. I really want this, she whispered to her empty apartment that night. But what else can I do? The answer arrived 3 weeks later in the form of a customer named Harold Voss, a well-dressed man in his late 50s who ran a boutique home staging company that furnished model homes and high-end listings for realtors across the city. He'd been standing in the same aisle at Everly for nearly 30 minutes, clearly overwhelmed trying to choose between 2 very similar accent chairs for a listing he was staging that weekend. Jasmine, restocking shelves nearby, noticed him circling the same 2 chairs for the 3rd time and finally walked over. "Can I help you with anything, sir?" He explained his dilemma, and Jasmine asked a few quick questions about the listing, the buyers he was targeting, the light in the room, before pointing confidently at one of the 2 chairs. "This one," she said. "The other one photographs beautifully in a showroom, but it reads cold in real listing photos. Buyers respond to warmth." Harold looked at her for a long moment. "You sound very sure of that," Jasmine laughed. "I've watched people shop for furniture every evening for months now. You start noticing patterns." Harold took her advice, and 2 weeks later he called Everly Home Goods, asking specifically for her. The listing had sold in 4 days, the fastest sale his company had closed all year, and the sellers had specifically complimented how the living room felt. He wanted to know if she'd be willing to come work for him directly, helping select furniture and decor for his active listings at a salary more than double what she made combined from both her current jobs. Jasmine sat in stunned silence for a full 10 seconds before saying yes. She started within the week, and she told absolutely nobody, not her parents, not her friends, because for the first time in her life, she wanted something to simply be a surprise instead of a burden she had to explain or justify to anyone first. The first few weeks at Harold's company were harder than Jasmine let on, staging houses in neighborhoods she'd never set foot in before, learning the difference between what looked good in a showroom and what actually made a stranger imagine living somewhere, driving to 3 or 4 properties in a single day, in a car she'd borrowed from a cousin because she still didn't own one herself. Harold noticed her instincts sharpening faster than any assistant he'd hired before, the way she could walk into an empty room and immediately see what it needed, rather than what was simply available. And within 2 months, he'd given her a small raise he hadn't originally planned to offer so soon. Jasmine banked nearly all of it. She kept living the same modest way she always had, still taking the bus most mornings, still packing her own lunch, because the money wasn't for a new life yet. It was for one single day. Month after month, she worked hard at Harold's company, learned faster than he expected, and saved nearly everything she earned into that same envelope, which had long since become a proper savings account. As her 25th birthday approached, Jasmine finally had more than enough for the celebration she'd dreamed about since childhood. 5 months after that porch conversation, people could hardly believe what they were seeing. Jasmine was personally delivering elegant, embossed invitations, and the venue printed across the top was one of the most sought-after event spaces in the entire city, the kind of place people waited a year to book. The moment the invitations landed in people's hands, questions started flying everywhere. Jasmine, the same Jasmine from the grocery store register. Where was she getting this kind of money? The gossip moved fast, through family group chats, through phone calls between aunties, through whispered conversations at church. Her Aunt Pauline called her Aunt Sherry the same evening the invitations went out, and the two of them stayed on the phone for nearly an hour, turning the question over from every angle. "You know she still works that register at the grocery store," Pauline said. "My daughter saw her there just last week." Sherry lowered her voice the way people do when they're about to say something they've already decided is true. "Then where is a girl like that finding money for a haul like this? It doesn't sit right with me." By the next morning, that same conversation had traveled through 4 more households, each retelling adding a little more suspicion than the last, until the story circulating through the family had very little to do with the truth and everything to do with what people were most comfortable believing about a young woman suddenly doing better than anyone expected. Tanya, Renee, Bex, and Coco ended up on a group call one evening, turning the same question over and over. "My husband makes good money and gives me a real household allowance," Tanya said, "and even I couldn't afford that venue for a birthday party. I'm a licensed nurse," Coco added, "and there's no way my salary stretches that far either." Renee, who ran a small boutique of her own, agreed. "I know exactly what it costs to keep a business running, and something about this isn't adding up." Beck stayed quiet for a moment before finally saying what none of them wanted to say out loud. "I think we need to consider that the money isn't clean." Nobody had a better explanation. And so, without ever asking Jasmine directly, without a single one of them picking up the phone and simply asking the question to her face instead of to each other, the 4 of them quietly decided among themselves that they wouldn't attend. The morning of her birthday arrived exactly the way Jasmine had pictured it since she was a little girl. She sat in front of a lit mirror while a makeup artist worked carefully on her face, complimenting her glow, while a photographer moved around the room capturing the moment from every angle. This was really happening. The dress, the makeup, the photos, the party she had worked 2 jobs and 1 secret career change to give herself. Her phone rang partway through, her parents' number lighting up the screen, and she answered with a full smile. "Happy birthday, baby," her mother said warmly. "Happy birthday, Jazz," her father added. "Thank you," she said, glowing. Then a small pause. "We won't be able to make it today," her mother said gently. "Something came up," her father added. "It's okay," Jasmine said softly, even though it wasn't quite. Then, almost on cue, her father asked the question that seemed to be on everyone's mind. "Jasmine, where exactly did all this money come from?" "Your mother and I have been wondering the same thing." Jasmine smiled into the phone. "That's a surprise," she said. "I'll tell everyone after the party." If you found out later that the very question your family used as an excuse to stay away was something you'd already promised to explain that same day, would that make the absence hurt more or less? For Jasmine, it made it hurt in a way she wouldn't fully understand until she was standing alone in that hall. The car ride to the venue felt like floating. The entrance was breathtaking, exactly as she'd pictured it 100 times in her head over the past 5 months. Twin chandeliers catching the afternoon light, a welcome table set with a framed photo of her that the venue coordinator had helped her choose weeks earlier. But the moment she stepped through the doors, something felt wrong. The room was silent, completely silent. Row after row of beautifully arranged chairs, gold-rimmed place settings gleaming under soft lighting, an entire hall decorated exactly to her vision, and not a single person in it. The music she'd hired a small band to play sat frozen mid-setup, the musicians themselves glancing between each other and Jasmine with quiet, uncomfortable pity. "Why is my hall empty?" she said out loud to no one, her voice cracking. "Where is everyone? I invited every single person I know." She walked slowly down the center aisle between the empty chairs, past the table where her favorite childhood song had been printed onto small keepsake cards for guests to take home, past the corner where a photo booth sat fully set up and entirely unused. And with every step, the silence pressed in a little heavier. She stood there a long time, tears gathering, before finally turning to the catering staff and asking them, in a voice steadier than she felt, to package up the food and share it with anyone outside who wanted it. If the people she'd invited weren't going to come eat it, somebody should. Anybody. One of the servers, a young woman not much younger than Jasmine herself, quietly told her the food was some of the best she'd ever plated, and that whoever ended up eating it outside was going to have a very good afternoon, an attempt at kindness that Jasmine appreciated more than the woman probably realized. After that day, Jasmine disappeared. No dramatic announcement, no goodbye. She simply stopped answering. Days passed, then weeks. Her parents eventually went to check on her apartment themselves and were told by a neighbor that she'd moved out weeks earlier, no forwarding address left behind. For the first time in either of their lives, real fear settled into Ruth and Desmond Ferris's chest. Their only child, gone, and no one seemed to know where. They called every relative they could think of. They drove to the grocery store where she used to work, only to learn she'd left that job months earlier, information that startled them further, since neither of them had known she'd stopped working there at all. They tried Everly Home Goods next, and the manager there could only confirm she'd worked evenings for a few months before leaving for another opportunity nobody at the store could name. Every thread they pulled led to another dead end, another version of their daughter's life they realized they'd known nothing about while it was happening right in front of them. Tanya, Renee, Bex, and Coco tried calling too, repeatedly, and got nothing but silence back. Weeks turned into months, and the same aunties and uncles who'd spent weeks gossiping about dirty money now spent their evenings anxiously calling anyone who might know something. Nobody did. It was as if Jasmine had simply stopped existing. 3 hours away, in a quiet apartment furnished with pieces she'd picked out herself using her employee discount, Jasmine already knew all of it. She knew her parents were searching. She knew her friends were calling. She knew the same people who couldn't spare an evening to celebrate with her were now spending every evening trying to find her, and some nights she sat with that thought until it turned into something close to a bitter, tired laugh. She'd taken a small transfer within Harold's growing company to oversee staging for a new batch of listings in a neighboring city, partly for the opportunity, and partly, if she was honest with herself, because putting real distance between herself and everyone who'd stayed home that day made the silence easier to carry. She kept mostly to herself those first few months, working long hours, eating dinner alone most nights in front of whatever was on television, occasionally striking up an easy, undemanding friendship with a coworker named Priscilla, who never once asked her anything about her past beyond what she volunteered on her own. But underneath the hurt, she couldn't stop thinking about her parents specifically, picturing them spending the rest of their lives wondering what happened to their only daughter, and that image was the one thing she couldn't let stand. So one evening she sat down and wrote a letter. She told them she was safe. She asked them, gently but clearly, to stop searching. And then she finally answered the question everyone had spent months whispering about, exactly where the money had come from, laid out plainly from the very beginning, from the notebook plan to the second job at Everly, to Harold Voss and the staging company, and the salary that had finally made her dream possible. She wrote about the 5:30 alarm she'd set for months without a single day off, about the ache in her feet after closing the grocery store and then standing another 6 hours restocking shelves at Everly, about the fear she'd felt calculating her savings 4 months out and realizing it still wasn't enough. She wrote about Harold Voss circling that same accent chair for 30 minutes and how her one confident answer about warmth versus cold in listing photos had quietly changed the entire direction of her life. She folded the letter, sealed it, and had identical copies delivered days later to her parents, to Tanya, to Renee, to Bex, to Coco, and to a handful of relatives who'd spent months speculating, including her Aunt Pauline and Aunt Sherry, whose late-night phone call, unbeknownst to them, Jasmine had heard about secondhand months earlier from a cousin who hadn't been able to keep the story to herself. As each of them opened their envelope and read through it, the full shape of what they'd done settled in slowly, painfully. They read about the 5:30 alarms and the aching feet after double shifts. They read about the accent chair and Harold Voss and the salary Jasmine had never told a single person about because, for once in her life, she'd wanted a surprise instead of an explanation she had to give in advance. They read about a woman who had spent years showing up early and staying late for every single one of them, and who had asked, one single time in her whole life, for the same thing back, only to be met with silence and suspicion instead. Pauline read her copy twice before setting it down on her kitchen table and sitting in silence for nearly 20 minutes, thinking about that same phone call with Sherry and how easily she decided what was true about a girl she'd known since birth without once picking up the phone to ask her directly. Her parents sat with the letter a long time before either of them spoke. For the first time, they understood exactly how alone their daughter had felt standing in that empty hall and how much that childhood promise of maybe next year had actually cost her over the years. Across town, Tanya, Renee, Bex, and Coco sat with their own copies, remembering every single time Jasmine had shown up without being asked, and realizing, all at once, that the one time she'd needed them to simply show up in return, they had chosen doubt instead. In the weeks that followed, apologies came from every direction. Her parents called, her friends called. Even the aunties and uncles who'd spent the most energy gossiping reached out, one by one, to ask for forgiveness. Tanya sent a long, honest message admitting she'd been the first one to say out loud that something seemed off, and that she'd carry that regret for a long time regardless of what Jasmine decided to do with it. Renee, running her own small boutique, wrote about how strange it felt to realize she judged Jasmine's sudden success using the exact same suspicious tone she hated when customers used it on her own hard-won business. And, slowly, Jasmine forgave them, because holding on to that particular weight forever wasn't a life she wanted either. But forgiveness didn't erase what had happened, and she needed real time before anything between them could feel normal again. Jasmine kept working for Harold Voss's staging company, and within a year she'd been promoted to lead stylist, overseeing the design direction for every listing the company took on. She moved into a beautiful apartment of her own, furnished, of course, with pieces she genuinely loved rather than whatever she could afford at the time. She traveled when she wanted to for the first time in her life, took a solo trip to the coast that spring, simply because she'd never once in her life done something purely for her own enjoyment without justifying it to someone first. But something between her and her old friend group had shifted permanently, a closeness that didn't return exactly the way it had been before, even after the apologies. The four of them still talked, still checked in, but the easy, automatic trust that once meant Jasmine would drop everything the moment any of them called had quietly, permanently changed shape. Life, as it does, kept moving forward regardless. A year passed. As Jasmine's 26th birthday approached, her parents called and asked her, gently, to come home for it. After some hesitation, she agreed. The moment she walked through her parents' front door, something felt different, though she couldn't place it right away. Before she could ask a single question, the living room doors opened, and the space behind them had been transformed. String lights, flowers, a cake, and a room full of faces she recognized immediately. Her parents stood right there. Tanya, Renee, Bex, and Coco stood together near the back, all four of them smiling nervously, the way people smile when they know they still have work to do to earn back trust they'd broken. Aunties and uncles filled every remaining seat, including Pauline and Sherry, both of them a little quieter than usual, both of them clearly aware of exactly what they'd contributed to the year before. This time, every single chair was occupied. Nobody was missing. For a long moment, Jasmine couldn't say anything at all. A year earlier, she'd stood completely alone in a hall exactly like this one, wiping tears in a designer dress with nobody there to see it. Now every person she'd ever shown up for in her whole life stood in front of her, having finally shown up in return, however late that return had come. Her mother crossed the room first and took both her hands, her own eyes already glassy. "We can't undo what happened," she said quietly, "but we wanted to make it right, however late that came. We should have asked you directly instead of wondering behind your back, and I will carry that regret for a long time." Jasmine broke down right there in the doorway, and her mother pulled her into a hug that neither of them let go of for a long time, while her father stood close by, one hand resting gently on his daughter's shoulder, saying nothing because there wasn't really anything left to say that the hug wasn't already saying better. The rest of that evening, filled with music and laughter and the kind of ordinary, easy joy Jasmine had pictured as a little girl watching other kids' birthdays from the sidelines. Tanya found a quiet moment to pull her aside and simply say, "I'm sorry," without any qualifications attached to it this time, and Jasmine, for the first time since the letters had gone out, felt something in her chest loosen just slightly. It had taken 26 years, one empty hall, and a letter that finally told the truth nobody had bothered to ask her for directly, but the birthday she'd carried inside her since childhood had finally, actually arrived. And that's the lesson worth sitting with from this one. The people who show up for everyone else are not obligated to prove where their good fortune comes from before anyone else will show up for them. Doubt dressed up as concern is still just doubt, and it costs the people we love more than we usually realize until the room goes quiet and nobody's there. If someone in your life has spent years showing up for you without ever asking for anything back, the day they finally do ask, That's not the day to start asking questions instead of just walking through the door. If this story reached something in you, subscribe and turn on that notification bell, because this channel is built on exactly these kinds of stories, and there's always another one waiting.